The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to the Disrupt Education Podcast. I'm Peter Hostros, the host. Hey, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You'll get the Disrupt Education Podcast right to you. I've got a wonderful guest today. William Minton is the CEO and founder of CanopyEd. William, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
All right, thanks, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, well, that was a very short introduction. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what are you doing these days?
Well, I've worked in education for about 15 years now. I've had the privilege to do a number of different things. And currently, as CEO of Canopy, we have sort of three main branches to our work. There's a consulting branch, a tutoring branch, and then an ed tech software development branch. Around the consulting work, we do a lot of work with partners where we help them evolve beyond webinars. So maybe they have a webinar where they have like static narration on top of PowerPoint slides and it's an hour long and it's kind of dull. And we help them evolve beyond that by transforming it into these sort of like shorter, more engaging videos and incorporating better reflection questions throughout. So we do that with a number of partners and we've done a range of other work as well. That we did a lot of that last year when people were shifting everything to virtual. So like helping all cert programs move their whole program virtual. But we've also helped cities design early childhood initiatives that have gotten national recognition. And I've done a lot of the consulting work over the last 5 years, although we're winding that down a little bit to focus on the other branches. The tutoring branch is interesting and growing very quickly. So because of the stimulus funds from last year, there's a really strong theme nationally from national policy perspective to focus on sort of small group or one-to-one intensive tutoring, specifically around early literacy skills. And so we're the largest provider of those services in the state of Louisiana. And that has been really interesting to be kind of on the vanguard, the cutting edge of this new national trend. Because there's this feeling that we have access now, right? There's tens of millions of Chromebooks that were purchased last year, right? So there's this perception that the access problem has, if not been solved, that the gap's been closed a lot. But what we're learning as we're part of that is that it's a little bit trickier than that, right? Especially whenever you're dealing with historically under-resourced communities. And developing habits around technology. It's been an interesting learning experience. It's been interesting to be at the front of that. And then the third branch of software development is where we're focusing more and more of our energy, which is around the development of the Canopy platform, where we are trying to just reimagine the ways that technologies can support educators. And it's amazing how novel it is to have ed tech products designed by teachers for teachers. And so we're really excited about what we're building there and what we have in the works for it.
We're going to jump into that because I think there's so much disruption happening and you're providing a lot of pain relievers, if you will, for all of those things. Let's go into, so you've been in education for 15 years. I always like to ask, educators or people who are in education have their own path of education. Take us back as William as a student. What were you like and maybe what were some of the pinpoints or pivotal points of your journey that kind of led you to where you are today?
In my K-12 education, I always loved learning. I was always really focused on reading and just interested in ideas and talking with interesting people and watching documentaries and just really, even in high school, I would just have these late night diner conversations with friends to sharpen my discussion and debate skills. As far as my actual GPA goes, it wasn't straight A's. Yeah, I always had this attitude that, like, what's most important to me to read are the things that I'm interested in reading, and those are the things that I'm going to read. So I was reading, like philosophy and, like, Schrodinger's cat and stuff in high school, but that, nobody was assigning that to me or testing me on it, so it wasn't reflected in those grades. um, but I did well enough and did well enough on the standardized assessments and everything to get into college and get into the honors program at University of Pittsburgh. Um, and again in college, again, like, I did fine. I A's and B's, but most of the important things I learned were self-driven, passion driven. I got this idea to start a political magazine, so nonpartisan political review, and through that relationship with the honors college, leveraged it into doing this, like, research project in Central America, which was really amazing. And just really, my personal learning journey has been a journey of following passion, and to being able to be comfortable with that, to not be like, oh, like, I'm supposed to do this work because it's important, because one person's going to read it and put a grade on it. And I think that that's come through in my larger attitudes towards education as an adult, as a professional, and how I've really tried to provide opportunities for young people to follow their passions.
Well, I love that too, because I think it's also you're also providing a lot of opportunities for educators as well to kind of take charge, right? So let's unpack that a little bit. So you got these three areas of CanopyEd. Let's jump into pandemic. Those early days, like you said, everybody was scrambling and trying to figure things out. What were some of the high points and low points as the pandemic evolved and you have CanopyEd and you're building this thing?
When the pandemic hit, I was in a school, or like when the lockdowns, like, started, sweeping across the country. I was in a school working with this program called Humanities Amped that does really great, youth voice driven, critical participatory action research, CPAR work. That was great. I was going to try to create this virtual course profile and, like, how you do CPAR programs. We're, like, filming these students, and the announcements came on. They're like, from now on, there will be no visitors allowed in the school. We're, like, looking around because we're the visitors. And then before we were even out of the school, like an hour and a half, like an hour later, the announcements came back on. We're like, and school will be canceled next week. And nobody went back, right? So it was, that project unfortunately ended up not recovering. It's sort of, that footage is where it was that day. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of work with professional development. We do a lot of work with virtual professional development. I presented at the National Charter School Conference in 2019 about how to use virtual platforms to reimagine professional development. And so because of that, I started getting phone calls from folks who were saying, like, we do this stuff in person all the time, and now we need to shift to virtual. Like, how do we do that exactly? And those were folks who were already starting to think. They knew that it could be done better than how they were doing it. They knew that the 90-minute, PowerPoint narration was not going to, be the type of experience they wanted to create. And so that was really interesting, working with one alt-cert program in particular to translate their whole program virtual. Then also working with an arts integration program that normally did these week-long intensive institutes with follow-ups, and we translated all of that to virtual, which was really, really interesting to me. Like, I've been interested in the arts. I used to manage a theater program for youth, and that was really interesting. So as I do more of this work, I get to learn. As I do those projects, I'm doing some work on trauma and adverse childhood experiences now, and it's really interesting. I get to learn that work as I do it.
Yeah, and I think the trauma, social emotional learning, all these humanistic, human-centered has really evolved out of this. Let's unpack that a little bit. Just today, this will be back when this was recorded and when it goes out, but you posted a little bit of, I think it was a little bit of social emotional learning piece around English, I believe. Unpack some of the cool things that you're kind of taking a look at in, understanding trauma, understanding, self-management, self-awareness, all these different areas of the humanistic approach. What kind of other things are you doing around that with CanopyEd and educators?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And it's really important. We're beginning to focus more on like understanding the humanity of education and the humanity of our children and teachers as well. And social emotional learning is becoming more and more popular. Restorative justice has gotten the level of structure where we can begin to scale those practices as long as we can create the time in the day for educators to do them effectively. But it's still in this larger context of cultures of compliance in most districts and most schools. And there's a real friction there, right? Because there is this attitude, this like modus operandi in the education system that, orders are going to come from the top down. They're going to tell you what to do and how to do it. And whenever you have that approach, it's inherently dehumanizing because you're being told what to do and how to do it. And where does your individuality, where does your personal, skills and personality come through? Where do you have room to add on to that as like the unique individual you are? And oftentimes the answer is not at all, whether you're a teacher or a student, right? You're being told to like do these things. And now there's like mindfulness, make some space for mindfulness, but that's not an opportunity to contribute to the systems or to change the systems. That's just a way to cope with the systems, right? And our teachers and students like shouldn't have to be like aspiring Buddhas just to like get through the rigmarole of their day to day. And so I think that if we really want to think seriously about those questions, we need to think seriously about student and teacher voice and how we are giving actual real influencing power to students and teachers to shape the expectations. And so that's kind of, running against windmills at the moment, but I do try to do that work where I can.
Right. I like the fact that you're obviously totally understanding of the education world and the time boxing and the framing of things and where we have time to do that. I love the fact that you actually said that because, in order for all this to work, it sounds to me like what I'm hearing you say, which is awesome in my opinion, is, we need to maybe change up the structure a little bit and we don't need to be grasping for the humanistic time. We need to start there and then building out. How are the different ways that CanopyEd is actually doing that in the spaces that you can do it in right now? I feel like looking at the platform, I know it's very learner or education centric, but kind of unpack that a little bit of some of the cool things that it does to keep it human, even in a digital age.
Yeah, I mean, technology is part of the answer here. It's not the whole answer, but it is an important part of the answer because technology at its most basic allows us to do more with less. And so in the design of Canopy, the learning platform, that's what we try to do. We try to allow teachers to do more with less and students to do more with less. So just by creating a platform that has an intuitive design and it is actually designed for K-12, it's not designed for higher ed circa 20 years ago, and it's not designed for business collaboration with this like K-12 use case. It's actually designed for K-12 educators, and it's designed for what they need with an emphasis on being intuitive and simple. And because that's where we're coming from, we're able to create a platform that helps teachers save time in their planning of lessons, helps them save time in their grading of lessons, helps them save time in how they give feedback. Currently in our design phase right now is what we call the Teacher Canopy, which is a sub-portal within Canopy, where teachers can, with literally 2 or 3 clicks, share an entire year's worth of resources with another teacher in an instruction-ready format, right? So I just borrow your whole 7th grade history class, and it's ready for students to begin using. Forget about copy machines, etc. There's been a lot of innovation in like the virtual course space recently. But if you think about, like, I want resources to use with my own students. I don't want to enroll them in your course. I want resources that I can use with my own students. All we have is teachers pay teachers. And that's great, but it's hardly, the cutting edge of what technology is capable of. So we're trying to innovate in that space. How can you share resources with strangers or with people in closed private networks in an instruction ready format and save all of that time of planning, and then we make grading a lot easier. And then on the student side, if a student wants to, it's the end of the year now, right? And a student wants to review everything they've covered and their teacher's been using Google Classroom. How many tabs would a student have to open to review all of the content that they, encountered over the course of their year in their Google Classroom? How many tabs? I mean, you're talking, this is probably close to 1,000 tabs. 180 school days, a form, a doc, a slide deck, it's ridiculous, right? So with Canopy, we really prioritize focus through organization, and we allow teachers to organize all of that content into a single browser tab. So it's literally the difference between 1,000 tabs for students to look through versus one single tab. And that takes all that mental energy that students are spending. A lot of the burnout from this year has been students burning mental energy trying to navigate the technology itself, not using that mental energy on content. And so by creating the simple, intuitive platform for students, they don't have to think about the technology at all. They can focus all of their energy on the content. Even down to things like, my developers would give me a hard time about our font size. So like, your fonts are really big. Like, are you sure you want, like, the standard fonts are this small? Like, well, we only want to be looking at one thing on the screen at a time. And then you scroll down below. We're not trying to, squeeze all this stuff on here. It just creates a very soothing, even our color scheme is designed to be a soothing, comfortable experience. So that's your question of how are we helping here. We're saving teachers time. We're helping students focus. Largely through organization and just creating an intuitive platform designed for teaching and learning.
So important. I think one of the biggest things that I personally learned from in just having this conversation with a student in the recent past is just that. Like, I'm looking at all these different things out there. I'm confused. By fourth period, a student just said this to me recently. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Right. And to hear somebody like you kind of putting something together, thinking about these things, font sizes and all these, that's wonderful. I recently got a book from my parents that was very small text. It looks really good and I'm interested in reading it, but I'm going to have to get a magnifying glass for this thing. So this is what happens. And so how did you really find all these pain points? And you were working on this pre-pandemic as well. So how did these pain points come about? What were the empathetic kind of lessons that you learned to get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think the real insight is that it's not about looking at individual pain points. It's about looking at teachers' holistic relationship with technology. And so in the tech sector, which I've learned a lot about the last 18 months, I did not know much about being a tech founder 18 months ago. But in the tech sector, there's real allegiance to, like, minimum viable products, right? And the minimum viable product should be designed around a pain point. And this is just like, established wisdom in the tech sector. You find a pain point, you build the smallest product you can to address that pain point. You see if anybody cares. And then if they do, then you build out features for a little bit, but then really you go hard on sales and scale. And that makes a lot of sense. It's really good for innovation. And I think we can learn a lot about innovation from these practices. But when you look at a profession like teaching, which is so complicated and there's so many different facets to it, you are going to have all of these different pain points. Right? My pain point is that I don't know if my students are paying attention to the video, so I want to be able to put a question in the video. Or my pain point is that my students aren't looking at the same thing I want, so I want to sync the screens together. or my pain point is that it's all text, I want audio and video, or my students can't edit PDFs, so they have to do this other thing to edit PDFs, or I don't know how to do group work. Like, you end up with all these varied pain points, and if you've been involved in education the last year, you probably know, like, everything I named, like, is aligned to an ed tech product. And so you end up with a situation where you have to juggle all of these things that started out as minimum viable products. You have to juggle all of these different applications. And while each of them is good at solving their narrow pain point, the accumulation of them creates a new pain point, which is having too many browser tabs open, having too many logins, having, applications that don't share data. And then you get new application like, oh, the only thing we do is single sign-on. So now we're going to sell you this thing that's just single sign-on. Like, we need to be thinking about the relationship between students, educators, and technology in a more holistic way. And so that's where we come in, and we're trying to create a holistic experience. We don't do everything that I just described yet, but the idea is that we'll eventually build out the core functionality of each of those things, right? A lot of those things have one core functionality and a bunch of bells and whistles. We're not concerned about the bells and whistles so much, but we want to try and have that core functionality as part of the Canopy platform.
I got to tell you, it's refreshing to hear, honestly. So as a secondary educator, our students, and putting ourselves in our students' shoes, that is a huge concern. And every single one of those pain points, I'm like, ooh, yeah, you reminded me of, like, March of last year, which is hilarious. But our students are even seeing, like, even different LMS systems and all these different pieces that come in, and it's no wonder. And I've even, it's interesting is I've even, like, worked with students on, virtually, and they show you their screen to work through a problem, and there's 300 tabs open. It's so refreshing to hear that, because I think you're spot on there. Where do you think the biggest pivots are going to happen in education here on out? Pandemic ending or post-pandemic? What do you think are some of the big things that you're kind of projecting to see?
That's a good question. I don't have a crystal ball about it. I think that a lot of it is like a challenge to traditional public school systems to be able to adapt more rapidly than they have in the past. And I think that they really need to rise to that occasion, right? I think that there's the pandemic has shown folks that it kind of sort of exposed to parents, what's actually happening there. And I think that, more than anything, I think it's a challenge to those districts to really the need to step up. And if they don't, I think that we're going to see an increasingly fragmented education system between, micro schools or, like out school courses, and a rise in homeschooling and, special, like, niche charter schools. I think you're going to see this fragmentation that is going to also have the effect of taking resources away from the public school system, which is where they are actually needed if we're going to actually care about equity and equality of opportunity and, like, the long-term health of the country. So that for me, that's the big question of, like, will established systems be able to adapt and innovate in a way so they can actually offer attractive options of choice to anybody any families that are looking to create really great experiences for their children.
I wanted to give a quick shout out to where can people find you? Where can people connect and learn more about the product, the services that CanopyEd does? How can people connect with you personally? Because I know we're going to have a lot of listeners that are going to be interested.
Yeah, I mean, we're very new right now. So I say that to mention the fact that everything is free, first of all. And so if you would like to just, like, log into Canopy and use it to create a course, you can go to CanopyEd.com. It's CanopyEd.com, and create a teacher account and start building content and sharing it with folks. If you want to learn a little bit more sort of big picture, you can go to CanopyEducation.com, which is our landing page that's a little bit more description about what we're up to. CanopyEd.com is just like a login to create those courses. And if you want to learn a little bit more about me and my background and follow the ideas that are driving Canopy, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. William Minton. Yeah, please follow me there. If you have a reason to reach out to connect, please reach out to connect. I always love talking to people through LinkedIn.
What you're doing with CanopyEd is amazing. There are so many pain points in education, and your clarity in that is wonderful. Listeners, you want to take a look at CanopyEd.com or CanopyEducation.com. And William, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with us today on Disrupt Education.
All right, thank you, Peter. It's been a real pleasure.
And don't forget to subscribe, everybody. And thank you again so much for listening on Disrupt Education. We'll catch you next time.